In this episode, I'm joined by Curtis Yarvin, also known as Mencius Moldbug, who is the author of the blog Unqualified Reservations, alongside being the founder of Urbit. We talk about Yarvin's latest work, Grey Mirror of the Nihilist Prince, alongside discussions on power, World War II, governance, metapolitics, and more. I'd like to say a big thank you to all my patrons for making all of this work possible, and if you'd like to support Hermitix Podcast or become part of the Hermitix community, please find our Patreon, merchandise, donation, and Discord links in the description below. Enjoy. So, Curtis Yarvin, thanks very much for joining us on Hermitix Podcast.
Thank you for having me, James.
By far the most requested guest from Series 1, actually, requested almost weekly since we begun. Finally here. And I know you've been on a lot of podcasts recently, so feel free to keep...
I've been on one or two.
One or two, so
yes.
Feel free to keep this short and sweet. For those who don't know you, perhaps a very, very brief overview of what it is you're trying to do with your writing. What it is you're trying to prove.
Excellent. Well, I mean, so for a very brief background on who I am, I wrote a blog called Unqualified Reservations, under the strange name of Mencius Moldbug, between 2007 and 2013. Then I went to work in the salt mines, and I've since departed the salt mines, and now I'm writing a book. And I'm serializing this book, which is something the Victorians used to do on my site, Grey Mirror. That's Grey with an A, mirror as in the thing that vampires can't look in, .substack.com. Substack, and I'm here, of course, to pimp it, but I won't get super rampart. The question, this book has a rather unusual title, which is A Grey Mirror of the Nihilist Prince, that may be a little too YA. I don't know if I'll keep it, but that's the working title anyway. And what it is an attempt to resurrect this genre, which is really a medieval genre called the Mirror for Princes. And a Mirror for Princes is just, there were hundreds of these things written. It's just basically an advice manual for how to rule a country, starting from scratch and assuming no limitations on authority whatsoever. This genre, in a way, if you wanted to describe it in kind of 21st century, terms and sound all like academic and shit, what you might say is that you can go to any of our nation's fine universities and you could study what might be public policy. And when you study public policy, you might think that you're doing the same thing that medieval authors were doing in their Mirrors for Princes, but you're actually not. Because what you're studying is what might be called relative public policy. What you're studying is basically the art of the possible and the art of the ways in which these very old, very sclerotic, very large regimes can be changed. And the reality is they really can't be changed very much at all. And so when you basically perform this exercise of relative public policy, what you're doing is you're saying, okay, am I going to propose something so picayune that it could actually happen, or am I going to propose something so ambitious that it would never actually happen? And actually, the valley there's a huge uncanny valley there, where basically, if you're anything that is even slightly different is basically impossible. And of course, even slightly different doesn't really cut it from where we are, right? So when you're thinking in terms of absolute policy, you're more thinking in terms of the question of, let's look at a situation in the modern world like the United States and Germany in 1945, or in Iraq after the invasion of Iraq, where you're actually saying, the question is, what would you do with sovereignty? You're not starting from scratch in the sense that the country is a clean slate, but in terms of power, it's a clean slate. And what is the right thing to do with that power? Now, that's, of course, a completely abstract question, that can be answered in a purely intellectual way without, that opportunity even being possible in any sense. It's still an interesting question to answer in the world that we live in. So that's basically the problem that I'm sort of working through right now.
Okie doke. I have got one question to follow on from that. Something you said about vampirism. But before I jump in, I'd like to get this question. Yeah, I think we all know who the vampires are, but we'll get to that. Now, this is the first time I've made clear guesses as to who you're going to put in the room. So maybe after you've said them, we can cross-reference and see if I was right. But the Hamidics question, you can place 3 thinkers, living or dead, into a room and listen in on the conversation. They don't have to be thinkers; they can be anyone. But who do you pick?
That's a great question, and it's a great style. You're probably gonna guess correctly, because I'm gonna give you the really obvious answer of Joseph de Maistre, Ernst Jünger, and Albert J. Nock.
I was going Ludwig von Mises, Thomas Carlyle, and I was gonna put Hitler. Sorry. I know you are.
James, have you read Hitler's Table Talk?
No, but Justin said to me I need to read Hitler's Table.
What you'll find is that the thing is, Hitler is I hate to say it, but Hitler is basically like a bad alt-right intellectual from the 2010s who like fell into the middle of the 20th century somehow. He's really like it's just, you see sort of exactly this kind of mix of kind of vision and superficiality, that really, sort of haunts this whole dissident world in a way. Of course, the people that the bulk of that regime is very sort of traditional and comes from a very old school world, but like Hitler is just this crazy bohemian. He's probably gay, but it's an interesting read because you really see in the Table Talk the real person, and he's just not very impressive.
I've heard Goebbels was like just as bad in terms of his diaries are just like dire, boring.
There's a film by Kenneth Branagh, actually. I'm surprised you don't know it, which is called. It's good that we started straight off with the Nazi material. There's a film by Kenneth Branagh called The Goebbels Experiment, which is actually a wonderful film. And it's basically Kenneth Branagh. Obviously, it's not a Nazi film, but it contains only Nazi content because it contains Kenneth Branagh reading from the Goebbels diaries over basically footage of Germany during these periods. And I don't know why this thing was made, but
what's the take-home message there?
I'm sure these passages are not going to be selected to put Goebbels in a positive light, right? But it's an intellectual exercise. It's like the other book, Thad Russell and I were talking about this the other day. The Human Smoke by Nicholson Baker. I don't know if you know that work or that author.
I listened to I did listen to the podcast.
Yeah. Which is just, Human Smoke is basically a collection of by this really acclaimed kind of novelist and author Nicholson Baker, who's actually really good despite being acclaimed. It's basically a collection of little tweet-length primary sources from World War II, and the sort of the tone of it is basically just extremely depressing, which is that everyone was crazy and everything sucked, which is basically the only accurate take on World War II. And so it's just really, really good. Sorry, go on.
No, that's fine. So your actual 3 were Joseph de Maistre, the other 2.
Ernst Jünger and Albert J. Nock.
Now Ernst Jünger is like my political idol. His recent war diaries, the concept of the Anarch, everything about him. Jungsville is probably one of the most underappreciated novels ever written.
Oh yeah. Oh, by the way, I didn't pick Carlyle, not because Carlyle is my personal guru, because I'm not sure anyone has the right to be in a room with him, and also he would just talk. Oymishville is, I've used it basically as an advice manual. I mean, it's really that, it's sort of that principle. I mean, if you've seen the first chapter that I posted on my Substack, it's basically straight out of Oymishville. I mean, the principle of the Anarch has never been sort of more relevant than right now, when you basically want to be in your little mouse hole. What was it that he called it? What was the the narrator's word for his retreat in the country. But yeah, but when things go badly with the Condor, he's like, I'm gonna get out of town, right? And it's really never been a better time to get out of town.
But that was pretty much what the whole German conservative revolution did. They all did that. I mean, like, some of the biggest thinkers, Heidegger did that as well. They all just sort of retreated and stuck to their principles. Like, Junger could have been this sort of almost German superstar, but he just retreated to plants and LSD in the end.
Well, the plants and the LSD came after the war. I mean, but during the war, he ran actually. He was at serious risk of being caught up in the 1944 conspiracy trials, right? I mean, he was probably, guilty basically in that sense. He'd certainly had plenty of prior knowledge of the plot. The other interesting thing about Junger that you see in the Paris Diaries, of course, one never knows with diaries like this how much were they rewritten, right? But one of the things he shows himself doing, I think quite convincingly, is basically investigating the Holocaust as best he can, from his position on the staff of the German embassy some kind of German mission in Paris, where he's basically like this cultural figure. Like, he's not like planning how to repel the Allied invasion, right? He's in uniform, but he's hanging out with Jean Cocteau, right? I mean, these Paris Diaries are really beautiful things, but the thing is, his take on the Holocaust is basically from this position, has this kind of I hate to use this term in relation to the Holocaust, but it's fresh. It's a really fresh take on the Holocaust, because he didn't hear about it, he didn't read about it in like Holocaust studies class, right? He's like, what is this crazy shit that's going on in the East? I keep hearing that there's this crazy shit that's going on in the East. Let me find out more about this crazy shit that's going on in the East, right? That was, I mean, that shows how difficult it was for a German to be informed about these realities at the time, right? This guy is connected. But it's just a great narrative. Basically, it's recommended, and it was recently. It had not been available. The Paris Diaries had not been available in English. There's still other untranslated Junger work, I think, if anyone wants to take a crack at that. Yeah, huge Junger fan.
I had Elliot Neiman on the podcast, who wrote the foreword, and I believe helped edit the diaries. So, I mean, he was saying there's a relative sort of Junger revitalization of sorts happening, but ultimately Germany does not want to touch anything to do with that era. But you mentioned the plot, and I believe the anecdote goes that Hitler eventually said, like, no one touches Junger, which sort of says something of his character.
I didn't know that, but it doesn't surprise me. I mean, Stalin would pull moves like that too. And of course, Hitler and Stalin certainly both see themselves as artists in their own ways. I mean, Hitler is, of course, an artist, literally. Yeah, I mean, Stalin was a writer. He was he didn't just rob banks. So yeah, I mean, I don't think FDR saw himself as an artist, but Churchill certainly did. But yeah, you see that in all the sort of tyrants of the period, you see these kind of whimsical things that are just totally foreign to our way of governing today.
So those three in a room, is this something you think that they'd, coherent idea or context or theme that they'd all talk around, do you think?
I think that, all of these writers were theorists of decline. All of them saw a kind of decline occurring in their own period. Maist has this sort of very wonderful, very theological book called The Petersburg Dialogues, which is basically set in St. Petersburg, in like an aristocratic, like yachting party, among some Petersburg aristocrats. And, these people are like, yeah, our whole world is coming to an end, right? And of course, 100 years later, it's Leningrad, right? They're like imagining the siege of Leningrad from the perspective of like the 1820s or whatever. So, they're all sort of theorists of decline, and, we sort of live in an age where, we live actually really in a moment where you kind of feel things coming apart, very rapidly. I don't think it's actually that rapid, but it feels like a rather rapid decay at the moment. So I think that I don't think any of them would be surprised by the conditions in the world today, but I'd certainly like to hear their perspectives.
I imagine, they'll probably all come back up at some point. But with regards to the Grey Mirror of the Nihilist Prince, it's been
Yes.
6 years since Unqualified Reservations. So you finished that in 2014,
13, yes.
2013, and okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
7 years. My bad. How come you're back to writing?
I'm back to writing because, what prevented me from writing was mainly working in the salt mines. Obviously, while I'm working in the salt mines, I don't really stop thinking. And also, one of the things that I sort of was coming to terms with when I was writing back then is the realization that there's a lot of stuff that, in a way, is easier to uh, appreciate the farther we get down this path. And so the like there's certainly a lot of the things that I was writing about, 7 or 10 years ago are just really, really banal common knowledge now, or common understanding. And so the question is basically, okay, what are the things now that are sort of just as unlikely as those things were 10 years ago? And I think that in terms of basically what A Mirror of Princes is doing is something that I really kind of tried to avoid doing, which is actually basically laying down a program for 21st century governance. I try generally really hard to talk about structure rather than policy, because structure is actually much more important than policy. But actually, you can't really have any kind of new or interesting structure, without some kind of understanding of what kind of program you would expect that structure to follow. Right, and nobody's really done that work. I mean, I don't think there's anyone who's getting paid to work on absolute public policy in this sense. So I figured that it would be just a good way to kick off my e-grifting career. And I mean, everyone else is doing it. Why shouldn't I? The Might as well. So yeah, that's basically that's where I am. And so essentially this is, to a substantial extent, the book is kind of rolling out a bunch of kind of intellectual material that was mostly, some of it actually dates to the period when I was writing UR, but was basically held back during that period.
Ah, okay. This is like the behind the scenes. Was it did it not make it because it was too structured and too much like a mirror for princes?
I think it was already, when the problem is that when you talk about sort of this attitude of the anarch and of detachment, I think runs through a lot of my work from the very beginning. It's certainly become more. I mean, I didn't read Amishville until like 2016 or 15 or something, right? But I think it comes through from the start. And one of the things that basically having any kind of a program or talking about programs does is it greatly confounds that message. And so, because you're saying, if I were king, I'm like, the government should do this, the government should do that. Like, I'm just like, quit it with the government should do this, the government should do that. Like, what you need is actually just a different government. And the difference between those things is sort of has to be made very, very strongly. But then, of course, the question is, if you need a different government, what exactly would that government do? It comes to a point where, if you're being, if you don't have a clear story about that, it's very easy to say, well, I know what he wants the government to do. It probably involves, Holocaust 3.0 or something, right? It's just you leave a vacuum and people fill in the vacuum with all this retarded stuff, that didn't, matter as much maybe 10 years ago. And so it's sort of, it's really, it's time. It's not the world is certainly not ready for this content in the sense of ready to use it. But I think that the content, should be out there, and more people should be kind of working in this domain.
Okay, and you mentioned that no one out there is writing public policy in this way of like an operation manual, as you put it. And if they were, it probably would be relative public policy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But have you found any contemporary examples of people who were doing this sort of thing, or what's the most contemporary example of this? Because when you go on the Mirror for Princes page, they're all we're talking 18th century.
Yeah, well, 18th century is 18th century is very late for that, right? And so actually most people when they hear that idea, they would think, of course, of Machiavelli's The Prince, and Machiavelli's The Prince is not really. It's actually more. It's not the same as a medieval Mirror for Princes, because a medieval Mirror for Princes is here's what you do with power. It's not here's how you get power and here's how you keep it, right? So it was assumed that those things were sort of maintained by convention and law, and if they happened, they were no one could give you any advice. And Machiavelli is like, look, I've been there, I've done that, I'll give you this advice, right? And that's why people resented. Machiavelli, the founder of modern political science, so much. So I think if you write such a book for the 21st century, it definitely has to include that Machiavellian material, because otherwise it's kind of unrooted. That's, of course, the hardest and most interesting part of the book. I may actually redact some of that still. So you may get a book with like a chapter missing. But that's basically the... that's sort of has to be the kind of the complete course of things. So you're essentially... What a modern Mirror for Princes has to be is essentially, in a sense, kind of a regime change manual. And one of the things that you see across history universally is every regime thinks it's immortal, and no regime actually is. That applies to republics, it applies to dynasties, it applies to military occupations, it applies to basically every form of government. And so... if you went to the Soviet Union in 1986 and talked to all the dissidents, you probably would not find more than 2 or 3 who thought the Soviet Union was going to, in any sense, collapse. And so when the Soviet Union did collapse, nobody had a plan for it. Nobody knew what the fuck to do. And actually, there was this huge need for intellectual just masturbation, if you will, that had not been fulfilled. And people basically were like, hey, we don't have a plan. Meanwhile, dissidents and official scholars, for the last 50 years have been thinking about radical ideas about the wheat harvest or whatever, right? There were a lot of people thinking about how to reform the Soviet Union, how to improve the Soviet Union, how to converge the Soviet Union with the United States, how to do all of these things, but no one was thinking about what would a different government do if it just inherited all this fucking mess. And answering the question of what would a different government do if it just inherited all this fucking mess, includes sort of a number of pieces. You have to have, here's kind of the utopia that you're heading for, here's your transition plan, here's how you clean up the mess, basically, because, you're certainly not keeping this fucking country in its present fucking state, and the thing is, a real regime change, like the fall of East Germany, would be a classic example of this. Completely bloodless. The government just disintegrates. These buildings just become empty. They're no longer used. There are still Stasi officers getting their pensions. I think there were for some time, maybe not anymore, still Wehrmacht officers getting their pensions, right? And so the thing is that when people think of regime change as sort of implying some kind of violent social discontinuity, they couldn't be more wrong. It's just like a company going bankrupt. It's just, half of it is paperwork. And so these things are really much more possible and much less unpleasant than anyone today thinks. And, furthermore, the clearer an idea you have of what that means, obviously the more possible it becomes.
And with regards to what you said there at the start with maintaining the power and actually keeping the power, which is always the problem. You said that it's a mirror because vampires can't look into it. So in our in our case, who or what is the vampire, and how do you stop the vampire being able to look into your mirror and understand how to?
That's that. You're implying a you're implying an analogy that I never meant, but I'll try to answer it for I'll try to guess what you mean and answer it for amusement. I think that there's certainly many vampires in the world. I think that one of the crucial things that you learn from Oymishville is this idea of like, one of the things that I'm most opposed to, or one of the sort of the worst decisions that you can take as anyone who is not a true believer, is to basically incite, or sort of is to tempt power. It's very important not to tempt power. Sometimes on the internets, this is referred to as Fed posting. But the thing is, actually, the irony of Fed posting is that most people almost everyone who Fed posts is basically doing so as essentially an artistic exercise, but it's a somewhat boring artistic exercise. And it's also, it's like, untalented art, essentially, which we already have too much of these days. The thing is that most people, while they understand that Fed posting is pretty stupid, don't take that principle to an extreme. And if you take that principle to an extreme, any sense of like, I can exert power against the regime or the powers that be, becomes this kind of fatal illusion. And so basically, to free yourself from that illusion and to sort of enter the principle of, essentially, I'm just going to observe this thing. Let me just watch what's going on. I'm not trying to get anyone to do anything. Jesus Christ. I'm just going to watch what's going on. I'm going to have a clear sense of what's going on. And yeah, I'm going to write a plan for what would happen if it all falls apart. Many such plans. And the thing is, so that, in a sense, is a position that is hard, is an intellectual position that's hard for the vampires to assail. And as for the advice in it, it's simply not accessible to them because it's advice for a regime with a completely different structure. You might as well, give a hippo a book about how to be a cat. The hippo is not going to start leaping on birds, so yeah, I mean, I don't think, it'll be, I'm certainly have no plans at present to work with a publisher. I'm just going to Amazon this. So that's maybe I'll be reduced to selling, boxes of copies out of the back of an old El Camino or something. Yeah, I think that, for one of the things I generally like to do is things that are intellectually, sort of abstractly very inflammatory, but concretely not inflammatory at all. If that makes sense to you, it's like abstractly, this idea of writing a modern mirror for princes is a very inflammatory idea, but it's sort of hard to say, okay, what's wrong with this, or what's, like, it's sort of, you're just like, yeah, this is a utopia. I mean, if I had the talent, I would do it as a science fiction novel, but I'm a terrible fiction writer. But that's sort of the spirit in which I'm working here. That's why it has the YA title also.
So to push out that Fed posting metaphor, do you think then that any sort of antagonism towards the current system isn't actually an antagonism, but that the system's just subsuming it back into it, and that's actually bolstering the system that we have?
That's correct.
Okay, so basically,
Yes.
you're asking us we really do need to stop shit posting. That's what you're saying.
Well, the thing is, your objective in I would never shit posting is an art form, and there's a difference between shit posting and fed posting, and the art of the properly done shit post is a great one, but it's a high art. It demands skill. Those who have no skill should not attempt to do art. That's just a basic, unfortunate, undemocratic reality of the world. If you want to get into, do you want to? Are any of your readers on Twitter by any chance? Do you want to get into some Twitter deep Twitter politics? Because I'm not on Twitter, but I do observe Twitter occasionally. So can I answer that question by describing something on Twitter? There's this wonderful concept, which is the concept of a groyper, and the groyper was invented by some artist on 4chan, and as a variant on Pepe. And the sad thing about groypers is that at first the groyper was a toad of peace, and the values of the deep groyper community, the real groypers, they had this wonderful word that they used. I think that since their shit has been stolen, this has disappeared. I could be wrong, but they had this wonderful word that they used, which was cozy. The essential property of the true groyper is that the groyper is cozy. And so the thing is, if your shit post is cozy, that's great. Now, then it was groypers were stolen by this kid, Nick Fuentes, who's very talented and very young. And, hey, he saw a good thing and he stole it. But, he, of course, is very antagonistic. And I just don't find that to be objectively effective. I'm sure he disagrees. In fact, I think it's objective. In general, antagonizing power is beneficial to power.
Because they're able to define what it is you're actually saying, because they've got the power.
Yes, and moreover, one of the things that happens very, very frequently is that you actually inhabit their frame. And so what they say to you is basically, these are who our opponents are, and because they're the authority, you listen to them. Okay, this is how you oppose us. This is what the people who oppose us are like. And so, let's say you're a kid in high school, and you've been sent, you shit posted in class, maybe even fed posted in class, and you got sent to the guidance counselor, and your guidance counselor sits you down and gives you half an hour of pure Marxist jargon, right? And pure Marxist jargon, and then she says, okay, this is what you need to believe is a good person, and if you don't believe this, you're a Nazi. And imagine the kid is like James Dean, and no, it's not. It's Marlon Brando in Rebel Without a Cause, right? He's like, okay, guess I'm a Nazi, right? It's like the most natural psychological thing to do. And so when they present to you this proposition that the only thing that your only real choices are to be progressive or to just go straight out hail victory. Once you accept that dichotomy, you're already fucked. And that has, that framing has, when you antagonize them from a position of being the heel within their kayfabe, if you know the wrestling terms, you're reinforcing their narrative, you're reinforcing their story, you're doing actually much more useful than any supporter of power could be. And is it possible to sort of break free of the pattern and break the pattern and basically not be a sucker in this sense? Sure, it's theoretically possible, but it's very, very hard. And if you're basically looking for an obvious way to antagonize the regime, you're almost certainly going to wind up being a tool, even with, of course, the best intentions possible. And so, what's funny about this is that basically what it means, and this is kind of the topic I explored in my first chapter, and I'm exploring a little more in my second, is that if you oppose the regime, if you sort of hope to act against power, and you're a dissident, you're a tool, unfortunately. But if you're acting basically for the regime, what's going on in your mind? What's going on in your mind is basically, I want to help black people. So I want to help black people, and my means of helping black people is to knock over statues. Okay, so basically, to an objective observer, this is deranged. But basically, the reason that this derangement persists is what they're saying is, I want to help black people. What they're doing is knocking over statues, and what they're actually doing is supporting the regime by flexing on its enemies. And so they're tools too, right? And so it's basically like everyone who involves themselves with this whole system by default is acting as a tool. And so essentially, the sort of the initial ask, to use a Silicon Valley term, the initial ask is basically just like, if nothing else, just please don't be a fucking tool. Once you basically, the thing is, what's telling you to be a tool is essentially a political instinct. And it's this instinct to matter. It's this, what Plato called themos, the Greeks called themos. It's very analogous to eros. It's the desire to matter, the desire to be important. Every high school senior in America wants to change the world, right? At least on their college applications. And pretty sure most of them are not going to change it at all. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's not even going to change. So you have this, this sort of all of this kind of fake pornographic importance that's basically going around. And so you acquire this, what the way the system commands your attention is that it gives you importance in exchange for being a tool. So basically, and that importance is almost always fake importance. So you're essentially, detachment for me, which is this basically it's political nofap. It's just, essentially like whatever you're doing, like the art of shitposting is great, like definitely the art of having a clear perception of what's going on today, as clear as 2020 will be to the year 2520, is absolutely essential. There's more than enough work there. And you just shouldn't, you don't even need to antagonize this thing. To a considerable extent, it's dependent on your antagonism. There's a I don't know if you don't play basketball over there, but there's this basketball move called pulling the chair, where you basically, someone's pushing up against you and then you step away from him and he falls down. So, pull the chair. That's not a sort of complete plan for solving the problems that we have. But the thing is, once you, in a way, there's another analogy that, maybe most of your listeners will understand, because I'll bet, most of them know what a PUA is. I'm not, I'm a happily married man, obviously, but I'm familiar with this dialogue, which has its flaws and its virtues. One of the things that PUAs will tell you, there's definitely some effective advice, out there. There's also some very bad advice out there. But one of the things that they will tell you that's basic is that if you want anything specifically, if you're a guy and you want women to like you, you need to be able to control your desire. You need to basically stop thirsting. You need to basically say, here's this instinct that I have, eros, and my control over my eros is so complete that this amazingly beautiful woman, this perfect 10, can be standing next to me at a party, and I can look right past her like she didn't exist. And then, when she looks at me, she'll be like, who is this guy who looked right past me like I didn't exist? Nobody ever does that. And then, he's this 5'3", 200-pound nerd, right? But he looks past me like I didn't exist. There's something here, right? And that's what you're trying to trigger by basically consciously mastering that instinct and turning it off. And in the case of people's political instinct, it's especially important to turn it off, because you're basically just being a tool. You're not getting anywhere. There's no prospect of creating a political baby here. This is a completely infertile exercise, and it's actually causing the problem that or it's helping to cause the problem that it claims to, be purporting to solve. And moreover, if you turn off this kind of instinctive thrashing of desire, you can basically start actually thinking strategically. because controlling this instinct allows you to think, it allows you to kind of pass the marshmallow test a little bit. The marshmallow test. It's this test for it's a test for kind of executive function that's given to small children, where you basically tell them they can have one marshmallow now or two in 5 minutes. And so the thing is, basically, what you see in the history of dissidents is this kind of constant craving for impact and meaning and success. And, then, it turns into, in sort of 2015, 2016, when the mainstream discovers that there's this sort of weird fermentation going on out there, it sort of turns into just straight out toxic media whoring, and just becomes really like just fails spectacularly. And of course, what is Donald Trump but straight out toxic media whoring? And so you're seeing a lot of those illusions, a lot of those kind of mainstream MAGA illusions, I think are collapsing right now, which is great. Mainstream conservative illusions are collapsing because the strategy of putting judges on the Supreme Court doesn't seem to actually work. So you're basically seeing, like, I think a lot of people who are opposed to the powers that be, sort of being forced to realize that their strategy for opposing these powers simply does not work. The more obvious that gets, I think the better.
It seems what you're talking about there is, I think it might have come up in Unqualified Reservations, is Hirschman's book, Exit, Voice and Loyalty. So you have this power, and if you're loyal to it, you're a collaborator, in the words of Grey Mirror. If you have a voice, you're a dissident and a tool. But of course, there's this problem of exit. So is exit the same as detachment, and how do we exit? And I think a big question would be, in what way, when you have people who already have a lot of power but are dissidents in their mind, so like elite exiters, what should they be doing, and what should exiters be doing? Like, in what way can we kind of start this detachment?
Well, there's no what they should be doing is what they're doing right now, which is another term for this that was frequently used in the 19th century was internal exile. So they essentially behave like an expat, even though they're still living there. And of course they basically live in the closet, and I would certainly advise anyone who's in the closet to stay there and delete your tweets while you still can. There's much to be said for the closet. When you come back to exit, voice, and loyalty, the essential problem is that there's really no exit from a global empire, not in the literal sense of the word. I have friends who are like, I want to move to Hungary. I'm like, Hungary is maybe where Franco's Spain was in 1975, 1970, something like that. Maybe even 1960, maybe even 1960. The idea that Hungary will stay this national populist, kleptocracy that it is, for another 20 years, I would say is preposterous. And then you'll see a complete cultural revolution there, and everything associated with the old regime will be very aggressively and rapidly destroyed. I mean, look at what's left of Franco's Spain, right? Some architecture. So in a way, there's no real exit from a global state. The answer is actually pretty simple, in my opinion, which is that you have to stop thinking of political change as an incremental process. Your model of, let's do some little thing and then we'll do some bigger thing and so on, is a model that derives from many, many centuries of leftist revolutionary experience. During all of these centuries, the same formulas have been tried in reverse, and they have never worked. Because there's a fundamental asymmetry there. You're, I assume, familiar with the concept of entropy and extropy. And so, if I throw a glass up in the air and it falls on the floor, it'll smash. But if I sweep the pieces up and throw them up in the air, they will not come together and land on the counter as a glass. Essentially, when people try to reverse the processes of leftism or apply those lessons which they see working to the right, and this affects everything from like passive resistance to terrorism to everything in between. None of it ever works. Your demonstrations, good luck with that. So of course, the tropes of like when you look at entropy in the real world, you see that there are two broad forms of entropy. There's a fast form and a slow form. Fast entropy is like a fire. Slow entropy is like rust. And what's interesting is that you see both of these phenomena in a political context as well. So fire is like revolution. Rust is like basically decadence. And so, America is pretty rusted out as a vehicle in a lot of different ways. But it still could catch fire a little bit. It doesn't seem, it's very, what you see is generally the rust is in, the sort of countries, it's a little like Dutch elm disease where the Chinese elms are adapted to it, but the Western elms are not. So basically it's rust in the source of the infection and fire when it basically spreads. So that's why basically Anglo-American rust really, Anglomania to a substantial extent creates the French Revolution, because they're like, oh, why don't we have a constitutional democracy just like England? Then, a century and a half later in Russia, they're like, oh, that worked out really well for France. But so when you look at sort of rust versus fire, in both cases, you're seeing this increasing disorder. And both of these are processes that are not reversible processes. And so when you think about it, do you have any kind of a math background? Have you done much? Totally fine. So for those with a math background, there's something called an integral, which you're probably aware of, which is just the area under a curve. Everybody probably had to look at that at some point. And when you measure basically the impact of leftism, what you're measuring is basically the height of the curve is like how much shit are they disrupting, and what they get done, their actual productive work, is the area under the curve. So a lot of people, when they think about opposing leftism, reverse that and say, let's do something that will create a bunch of area under the curve. Let's basically cause some trouble for them. That will increase our capacity to cause more trouble. Just like a little bit of fire causes more fire, a little bit of rust on your car causes more rust. Somehow rust has this process where it spreads like cancer, even though it's not alive. And so they sort of operate on that basis, that basically doing small things is good because small things add up. That is a very, very bad way to think for their opponents, because order is a very different thing from disorder. And when you want to create order, what you're looking at is basically always a situation in which this is done all at once. So actually, when you're thinking about, sort of the benchmark for success in a political sense, you're not thinking about the area under the curve. You're thinking about the peak value of the curve. If you dissipate, you're basically your energy system is more like a capacitor and less like a battery. What you're doing is charging it for a spike. And in your spike, everything has to work just right. And you basically only get one chance. Your shit is already burned out. In a sense, like, one of the things you'll note about American history is that this is actually done about every 75 years. So you're a Brit. You probably know some American history because you're really American. You've been a colony for quite some time. One of the things that really shocked me as a kid, I spent some time in Cyprus where I got 2 years of a basically faux British public school education in the English school in Nicosia, and I was shocked when I shouldn't have been shocked, but I was shocked that basically the British version of the American Revolution was the same as the American version. It was that the Americans were right. And I was like, wait, shouldn't I, I'm in the Commonwealth here. Shouldn't I be getting the British side of the story? And of course I was not. And that's because it's the true side. In any case, in American history, one of the things you see that essentially every 75 years, the United States is a monarchy. And so every 75 years, the United States sees a president who's actually in charge of the executive branch. So these presidents are, as you would probably guess, Washington, with basically Alexander Hamilton actually doing the work, Lincoln, with his secretaries Hay and Nicolay actually doing the work, and FDR with Harry Hopkins and Harold Ickes actually doing the work. None of these guys were actually really managers in a sense, but they were certainly monarchies. And so, FDR can create and destroy agencies. He can basically get huge public works programs going in 3 months, there's this wonderful, I don't know if I'm up for a performance right now, but I sometimes do it, where I just read the last 10 paragraphs of FDR's inaugural address. Now, bear in mind, this is taking place in 1933. Year you've probably heard of. And FDR basically says in this inaugural address, I'm going to paraphrase loosely, look, everything is fucked. If Congress, can do anything good, great. Otherwise, I'm going to need absolute power, and I'm going to need it now. And I'm responsible only to God. And that is not quite the way in which he governs, but it's reasonably close to the way in which he governs. And of course, this is a monarchy like any monarchy. It's not it's a monarchy of the whole American people, or at least it's a class sandwich, because FDR is, of course, from the very highest social class. He's really a born aristocrat. He's like if Trump was a little bit smarter and he was from the most fashionable people in the world. That's kind of his talent level. And he's, of course, appealing to the masses who are out of work. And so that basically squishes kind of the old bourgeois elite, just like in a vise, and creates the power structure we have today. So, I mean, he's very much a politician, but he's also completely running the government. He's basically the CEO of Washington, D.C. So that's not quite, and one of the things, there's this great line in his inaugural address. He's like, what I will need to meet this crisis is the power of a general repelling an enemy invasion. He actually, imagine Trump came in and said that. One time I did this speech and people thought it was my original work, and man, people flipped out. Because he's basically saying, yeah, okay, I'm going to need martial law here, or the economic equivalent of martial law, certainly. People actually knew what that meant at that time. And, obviously it was a very popular address. He was a very popular president. People were like, yeah, let's do it. Let's have the martial law. I think that now the level of authority that FDR had would not be quite enough. I think you need sort of just more of the power of the enemy general, which is basically absolute power. And until you're ready to do that, and until you're basically ready to make that delegation, and essentially say, okay, I don't like the government that we have now. It's not working. It can't work. And so I'm going to basically find something else, which amounts probably basically to someone else, and give them that responsibility, because I'm convinced that they're going to do a better job than the thing that's there now. Until you're ready to make that commitment, don't do anything. Don't think anything. Because basically there's nothing else that you can do.
So how do you spot the perfect moment to do that within all this disorder? Because leftism, as you put it, is disorder, and right is order, stability, security. Within all this disorder, and which is of course going towards is entropic. How do you spot the moment wherein you should put in your all? What does that moment look like?
That moment, by far the most straightforward way and the most American way, the most traditional way to perform an American regime change is simply for a newly elected president to take full constitutional control of the executive branch. The moment a candidate says, if elected, I will take full constitutional control of the executive branch, it's a completely different election. And so in a way, the proper way, and since the proper way is still possible, it would be very difficult for me to recommend anything but the proper way. Of course, there are lots of chaotic ways a government can fall. You're sort of going down on the disorderly scale toward violence and civil war, which I don't think we're really capable of. But it's really best to think of these things as being done in the most proper and traditional way, because they're always best done that way. And that way of doing it would essentially be FDR's way of doing it. And what FDR did was he took office. He had actually the plan for the New Deal had already been written. It was something called the Swope Plan. It was sponsored by the CEO of General Electric, Gerard Swope. I don't know who actually wrote it. It was just the usual intellectuals at that time. He knew what he was going to do. He made sure people, well, actually, he didn't make sure people had a clear idea of what he was going to do, but he probably should have. Certainly what he did had nothing to do with the Democratic platform. If you read the 1932 Democratic platform, it's hilarious. It's like it's a pure bourbon Democrat, old school gold standard, platform, small government, So, I don't think that would really cut it today, that level of kind of a narrative reversal. I don't think it's possible to be as dishonest as FDR. I think that actually the only path to any kind of regime change involves just crystalline honesty and transparency, and that gives you a very different. I mean, these events are never the same; they're always different in character every time they happen. Certainly, the character of what you have today is this very strong civic conflict, which is really a cold civil war in all of these countries between, here in the U.S. we say blue and red, so I suppose you probably say that as well. And has red been reversed now quite completely, or is Labor still more red?
Yeah, Labour's still more red. Yeah.
Labor's still more red. Here we reversed that. That was a clever decision by an anchorman in like 1980 or something. So you have this enormous civic conflict, which is really a conflict between the bourgeoisie and the aristocracy, or really the nobility. I used to have all these clever names, but now I just say nobility. I mean, you go to Burning. Ever been to Burning Man? Everyone at Burning Man is a noble. It's everyone at Burning Man is a noble. And the diversity is frankly not great. And so you have this conflict between the nobility and the bourgeoisie, which is very akin to the conflict of the classes and of the orders in the ancient Roman Republic. So in the Roman Republic, of course, first you have this older conflict between the patricians and the plebeians. Later, those categories dissolve and then kind of reform, and so you have the optimates and the populares, which are basically nobles versus bourgeoisie, and that sort of heightens to a level of civil war, and that civil war, which is a hot civil war in their case. I guess we've had these kind of little moments of fire, but it's a real war in that case, ends with, of course, the victory of Caesar, and Caesar comes from the party of the populares, right? And so, but the thing is, Caesar is then assassinated by some nobles he trusts too much, and then he's replaced by his nephew Octavian. And Octavian, who becomes Augustus, has basically the same policy. And his policy is that his empire, of course, he pretends that he's just restoring the Republic. His policy is that his empire is not the empire of one of these groups over the other, that it is actually the empire of all Romans. and the republic belongs to everyone. And now that there's no politics anymore, that's obvious to everyone. And what's remarkable about this is that it actually really works. And that whole factional dispute in Rome, which has just consumed so much energy, so many lives, this cold civil war, rather than being replaced by the domination, like some kind of weird apartheid domination or some kind of Spartan domination of one class over the other, it just goes away. It's never heard from again. And so, in a sense, the real sort of prize of, sort of regime change for Americans is not everything, starts working again, but actually their civil war goes away. Because the Civil War is actually being caused by this political structure. It's actually completely unnecessary. And so if you want to sort of get Machiavellian and basically ask how, when you see a regime change, does the new regime stay in power? It's like, well, how did Augustus stay in power? He stayed in power because, number one, he nailed it. Number two, he nailed it. And number three, the Republican energy, the Republic was dying. Like the emperors didn't kill the Republic. The sort of the virtue, the sort of widely distributed aristocratic virtue that the Republic relied on, every Roman writer of the last 200 years of the Republic is decrying the loss of this virtue, right? And so, in a sense, a republic is just a machine meant to take a society with widely dispersed virtue and concentrate that virtue into a force for virtuous government. And when that machine works, it's a very, very pretty thing. And it creates periods that are really celebrated historically. Arguably, those periods are celebrated not because of the system, but because of the amount of virtue that allows the system to operate. In most periods, you don't have that pool of virtue. Certainly in our period, you have the mechanism, but not the virtue. And it's the virtue itself that renders monarchies unstable. And so, in a sense, you look at basically the start of republicanism in the modern Anglo-American world, and it's clearly related to the rising virtue of the Puritan middle classes in comparison to the declining virtue of the royal court. In Elizabeth's time, basically, everything that's amazing about England is found in very close proximity to the court. In the time of Charles I, 50 years later, it's sort of easier to see these people as these kind of decadent fops. And it's just like, why are these nutcases in charge of us? Like, who are these people? Right? And so, the sort of the Puritan intellectuals go from who are these people to let's make up some lawfare bullshit that tells us that the king isn't actually the king. Right? And you're probably familiar with this approach of the Puritan law, lawfare bullshit. Like you look at the first half of the 17th century, you're like, oh yeah, that's the lawfare bullshit, but the thing is that they're doing it because they feel that they have the right to rule. And they feel that they have the right to rule because they're incredibly virtuous, godly, energetic, talented people. And when they actually get in charge, despite, having this like shit show of a republic, they get Cromwell in charge, and Cromwell, in fact, kicks ass as a king. But he's a Puritan king. He's a king from this rising class, right? So in a period of decline, actually, when you look at America's aristocracy, the only way in which they can find themselves to be virtuous is because they have the power to congratulate themselves. As soon as that power is gone, it's not coming back. Because this is not a class with, which just obviously knows it is not a competent ruling class. And, it can persuade itself that it's competent because it is in charge. But, the idea of, Burning Man out of power deciding that Burning Man should be in power is comical. And so that's, in a way, that's, the weakness of this regime is that it's actually, although, I mean, the ruling class is just as talented as it's ever been. Their IQs have not dropped, but their actual capacity to govern is very, very problematic. Once they're gone, like, it's like when East Germany falls, it's just like the day after it falls, there's no way to put it back together. It's just like people realize this is over. It's done. It's completely like, it's at an end. Now, this is much easier because this can sort of collapse into the West. But it's still like, this feeling that the whole monolith has toppled. It's this very, very tangible feeling, and it's sort of very separate from anything that has ever happened in the lifetime of anyone in a Western country.
Well, you spoke about the basketball analogy of pulling out the chair earlier and would detach ourselves, which then suffocates them getting the attention they need from an antagonist to then power them more. But we are talking about people who have, you make this clear in Grey Mirror that everybody is engaged now. Everyone has power, and everyone, I think, is now aware of their power as well. Like, social media and smartphones means that you can tap into power dynamics consistently. And of course, human or to human, status is something we absolutely adore. So, people aren't gonna like their toys being taken away from them. Right. So what's gonna happen when you derive people who rely on their power for their actual worth?
So what happens is that energy goes stale, and it becomes just grim and unpleasant, and it acquires much of its energy from escalation. And it's already escalated to quite a remarkable point, I would say. And so what you see is that your future is very, very Eastern European here. And it's certainly true that let's compare the sense of being a communist in Prague in 1930 to 1950 to 1970 to 1985. At each point, you're basically being asked to sort of participate in this kind of crowd energy. By 1950, all the enemies are actually gone, but you can still be convinced that they're enemies. By 1970, all the enemies are, they're like foreign or something. What you see is that these slogans become increasingly sterile. If you read Power of the Powerless, the Václav Havel piece that I made some references to, you basically are just struck by all of these parallels from, basically late Eastern communism with everybody has to put the Black Lives Matter sign in their window, except it's not Black Lives Matter, it's Workers of the World Unite. The difference is really unclear, but the difference is that you still have a lot of people, Black Lives Matter is still sexy. It's still, Workers of the World Unite. Most people in, Czechoslovakia in 1980 had been like, yeah, they couldn't really care less whether the workers of the world did or did not unite. But in 1950, much more so. And in 1930, it was a passionate, emotional cause that could consume your entire life. And frequently did. And so you have this staleness. And, the thing is that in a way, when I see all of this energy being burnt here, I see it as, there's this great line of Napoleon's, which is never interrupt your enemy while he's in the process of making a mistake. Not that we're in a position to interrupt anyone, but essentially when you ramp the energy up this high, you burn out people relatively quickly, and these exhortations become sterile much more quickly. So it was much easier for, kids these days find this stuff already pretty damn stale. Imagine how fresh it was in 1968. It was fresh as a daisy then. Okay, now imagine how stale it's going to be in 2045. It's going to be staler than fucking Vegemite you left out in the rain for a month, and so the thing is that what you're doing by generating sort of all of this energy is you're taking people who had not been sort of politically aware and politically engaged, you're exciting them and you're burning them out. And if the candidate that I endorsed for president, in the American election of 2020. You're a British podcast, so you're not in danger of violating FEC regulations, but I'm endorsing Joseph R. Biden for president. So you take all of this energy, and then you have, the presidency of, Senator Biden, who was born in the 1820s, I think, maybe the 1920s, something like that. You're pulling the chair in a much bigger way than I could. You're basically saying, hey, New York Times, hey, Trump doubled your revenue. Trump literally doubled your fucking revenue. Okay, what do you write about now? Right? Who's the enemy? Who are you trying to, and so you basically have, as you increase, you've enormously increased the amount of emotion that you're sort of pushing into people, and then you've reduced the stimulus. That is a recipe for just like this catastrophic, like, post-cocaine binge letdown, where, basically all of the bureaucratic crap that you put in place when you were so excited is still there. All of the, like, let's defund the police, let's go back to the 70s, etc. It's still there. It's very hard to reverse. And your excitement has just dimmed. And, it's like, this is what Nixon was trying to do when he ended the war in Vietnam. He's like, okay, no more anti-war protests, right? You all have to, like, go home and chill out and, put down the bong. Because, of course, nothing got college students more engaged than the idea that they were going to be sent to Vietnam, right? So essentially that, when you reduce that antagonism level, hopefully Trump isn't elected again, although it's, they're really going in for the kill at this point.
Trump's lack of action at the moment is he's actually enacting what you're on about here.
No, he's just been beaten into the dust. Trump is where Trump is right now is like the position of, like, I'm almost like it's time for the flight to Varennes. He's in like the position of Louis the 16th. Everyone who surrounds him hates him and despises any ideas he ever had. There's nothing he feels like he can do, and he's behind 15 points in the polls. I would have resigned long ago if I was Trump. He's just failed. And I knew and anyone with a brain knew in 2016 he was going to fail. It was obvious that, it was just headed for disaster, but, it was still exciting, and it still taught us a lot, and it still basically revved these people up to these totally unsustainable and unsubtle levels. And what these unsubtle things do is they drive out the elites. They basically sort of poison the emotional energy of the whole thing. They're just like, you're running on, if you're in a fighter plane, one of the things that all fighter planes have is they have the capacity to basically go to like a wartime performance level, where they're basically like, okay, I'm going to destroy the engine of this thing forever in exchange for getting 140% performance for the next 2 minutes. Right. And when I see them like turn the dial up to, like, maybe you previously thought they turned it up to 11, but now you realize actually it was only like 2.5, and, when you see them actually turn it up to 11, you're just like, there's all this high ground that they're giving away. Like, who can take the New York Times seriously after basically it says emotions are more important than like academically legitimate history, and with the 1619 thing, right? You're getting trashed by communist professors on the World Socialist website, literally. That's what happened. You've lost all of this high ground. And the thing is that a victory strategy that's based on just taking the high ground and staying there and not even, it's unoccupied. You're not even storming the high ground. There's nobody there, and you basically you take it and you fortified it and you wait for people to come to you. Is much more effective than anything involving tiki torches. That's really. If there are any teenage Nazis who listen to your podcast, that's my message for them. And the and just don't be the opposite of your guidance counselor. You're right that your guidance counselor is exactly what you think she is, but there are more opposites to her than one.
So your battle plan then is fully one of detachment. It's ramp up the energy of the collaborators to maximum level, and collaborators need dissidents to have somewhere to fire their energy into, and at the same time when that collaborator energy hits maximum peak, pull out or already pull out and no be there. But then what are they gonna target their energy towards? If there's nothing there, the left always begins to find new enemies, right, and new things. So in what sense can they not have anything to
that's exactly the case in like late in Czechoslovakia in 1980. Like who are the enemies in Czechoslovakia in 1980? Well, they're like a bunch of like rock musicians or something, right? And it's true, yeah, do the rock musicians get targeted? I mean, it's funny, one of the things people don't know about the Czech Revolution, which had this wonderful name, the Velvet Revolution, is that a large, a person who played a large part in that movement was Frank Zappa, because Zappa inspired this band, the Plastic People of the Universe, that was basically this kind of huge cause célèbre, So, in a way, it's like, first of all, when you're, are they going to come after the Plastic People of the Universe? Sure. They're going to come after you not for like sabotaging railroad tracks like you were the French Resistance, but for basically playing concerts, which is something you do because you're a musician. And that's ground that is relatively defensible. And so, in a way, when you're sort of, the more passive your defense is, and the more you're just like, hey man, I just play music, I just write essays on the internet, the more defensible that territory is, and the amount of energy they have is not a constant. The thing is, you have to separate sort of the demand for energy from the supply of energy, and to the extent, I mean, the disappearance of Trump derangement syndrome from the national press just removes this huge supply of energy, right? And far dwarfing anything that a few hundred subscribers to my Substack could contribute. I mean, it'll be such a tragedy if that energy loss doesn't happen and we have 4 more years of Trump fumbling around. But I'm an optimist, so I prefer to, I expect a Trump defeat. And then you basically have all of this energy just ossifies and it disappears. And so there's this sort of same desire, but it's not just the desire that counts, it's the energy. I mean, if you look at basically the difference between being, a dissident in an anti-communist in Czechoslovakia between like 1930, 1950, and 1970. Like in 1930, if you're participating in revolutionary politics, you're prepared to kill and be killed. It's just a thing. It's just, everyone is just like, and you see that when people sort of LARP this kind of period and imagine that they're like these like lethal revolutionary movements out there somewhere, on either side, right? And the truth is so pathetic compared to that. But in 1950, yeah, you be executed for being an anti-communist dissident. Yeah, that's still possible. In 1970, no. It's like you get, basically being canceled as a Czech dissident is very like being canceled now. You lose your career, right? Basically, like say hello to your new life as a manual laborer. Except now it's basically UBI and food stamps. So that's, again, you see this drop in energy, and the sort of the rise in energy is sort of more obvious to us than the drop, because you see that sort of more of these resources are being, more is being set on fire. But actually, if you look at the fire, it's not very hot, and the shit that you're setting on fire is not going to burn very well or very long. There's only so, like, the level of how politically excited is the whole world population right now is a level that you can't keep that level of excitement up. And so, the memory of it lasts, the kind of the burnout of it lasts, but the energy itself does not last. And I think that will create, a situation that's kind of very, you're seeing obviously the sort of general social decline continues, but you're just, that's a much less sort of pessimistic approach than I think most people who are dissidents are taking today.
Isn't there a problem there that you're left then with millions of people who are sort of who previously had all these little nodes of power inside them and they loved having all this little bit of power, who are just sort of unconscious, dwindling around, but hopefully the absolute monarchy, these people wouldn't matter. They would, as you say, people need to understand that they are largely irrelevant. So do you think these people would just accept their newfound relevance?
Well, even more so, actually. The truth is even more, hilarious than that, which is that one of the things you see as the regime sort of loses its, is no longer able to sort of compel anyone by its ideas alone. They're all compelled by their basically sort of personal and professional interests. And so what you get is a regime that's made entirely of power whores. And the only reason that you can love the powers that be is because if you just love power and are a slave to it. Right. So the more convincingly your regime, the more convincingly and non-incrementally your regime discontinuity proceeds, the easier it is to capture the loyalty of these people. The people who are power whores, there's quite a number of people, who were actually so flexible that they managed to prosper, under Weimar, under the Nazis, and under the subsequent occupation, which is really quite remarkable. One of the sort of the most questionable historians of the post-war period in Germany is this guy named Fritz Fischer, and Fritz Fischer basically wrote this. He sort of re-revised World War I to kind of put it in line with the German is the eternal Hun, basically, feeling. He's like World War I, they were really Nazis too, right? But in fact, Fritz Fischer himself had been a Nazi. He had been a Nazi historian, right? And so these people are actually very flexible and docile. Because only very flexible and docile people could, serve the shit show that we have today. And that's sort of one of the great secrets, in a way, of regime change is that, it's like if you imagine, let's think of the Soviet Union in 1917 and 1989. Let's say you tried to explain to an old Bolshevik from the teens or the 20s what happened in 1989. He would be like, but where is my war? What? He's like, what about the Komsomol, the Soviet youth? How are the youth not standing up, for the revolution? How many people are in the Komsomol? And you'd be like, well, about, 1 million. 2 million, something like that. And he's like, where are they? Why are they not standing up? He's like, and you'd have to be like, well, the problem is they didn't join the Komsomol because they believed in the workers of the world uniting. They joined the Komsomol because they needed to join the Komsomol for some fucking job, right? And they joined the Komsomol for their careers. And so everybody is mouthing this ideology, but it has become only skin deep. And it can evaporate very, very easily. What is keeping that ideology is more than skin deep in the West today. It's actually quite deep. What is keeping it deep is basically these kind of, boogeyman threats from the right, the best possible boogeyman is to have, the leader of the free world be, the white nationalist Trump or whatever. That's driven people to suicide. That's kept, I mean, that has literally driven people to suicide, and it's a fucking joke. And the and so you sort of removing these stimuli, and even these stimuli would age. You could have Trump in power for 30 years and people would realize, oh wow, it doesn't actually matter. And I say in power, I mean, of course, in office. I always try to say that. And Elizabeth II is in office, but she's definitely not in power. The So you're basically looking at this situation in which it doesn't feel like time is on your side, but actually, in a way, time is on your side. And that's a sort of reason not to kind of think in this panicky short term, like what you're doing when you try to matter in the short term as a dissident against a regime this enormous is you're basically thrashing. You're like, oh, I can't think of what to do, but I got to do something because this is fucking outrageous. Okay, you're right that it's outrageous. It is outrageous. You should truly realize intellectually that it's outrageous, but then you should reach around and use your forebrain to turn off your limbic system. It is outrageous, but you're not allowed to have any rage. That combination of being, outraged in your frontal lobe, but completely calm emotionally, is it's just what's necessary to actually, matter and be effective. You shouldn't associate with people who can't do that. I mean that very, very literally. You shouldn't associate with people who can't do that. They're dangerous to themselves, they're dangerous to you, and they're dangerous to everyone else. Even if it's a very, very mild case of the rage. And so, when you evolve beyond that, and, you're sort of evolving gravitas and wisdom, and they're devolving into just, the amount of incoherent gibbering I've seen in the pages of the New York Times lately, I mean, literally incoherent gibbering, is remarkable. So, basically all you have to do to win anything is to basically be in a situation where you're continuously rising and your enemy is continuously falling. As long as you can basically set up a situation where that goes on indefinitely, at some point you're going to actually win. And, that's a very different strategy, and it certainly doesn't involve antagonizing power at all. And in fact, one of the things that I think about when you talk about sort of mirrors for princes is one of the things that when you actually get to the end game where this happens, one kind of separation that you want to perform to avoid sort of developing these kind of power horror psychology is you basically want to say, if anybody is involved in basically imagining this future, they can't be involved in implementing it. So basically, you're not like Hitler, where he's basically laying out his program and then he's going to run his program, right? You're more like Marx, where you're like, okay, here's the program, and then somebody's going to come along and actually do this. I don't know if Marx actually saw himself as the future dictator of the Working Man's International or some shit, but he was obviously unsuited to that role, and so frankly am I. And that's just a better way to think about things than when people sort of form these movements. What they're doing is they're either LARPing early 20th century movements, they're LARPing older, even 18th century movements, but there's still this sort of quality of LARPing. Why are you a movement? What are your people going to do? You don't sort of, like the difference between having 10,000 people in your movement or 1,000 people in your movement is like, well, you're a bigger target, but what do you gain from that? So it's a different way of thinking. It's a very Jungerian way of thinking about how to kind of exist outside power and not in antagonism to it. And, the role of being Of course, Junger's Anarch, the narrator, Martin Venedor, is actually a direct servant of power. He serves, this imaginary science fiction caudillo named the Condor, which is a great name. The Anyone who wants to be an absolute monarch should definitely nickname themselves the Condor. Uh, but the he's a servant of the Condor, but he's also has not thrown in his lot with the Condor, and which is very similar position in some ways, somewhat similar to position to Junger's position himself under the Nazis, and it's this kind of manual in how to withhold yourself from the powers that be. And once you have a critical mass of people that are basically like, no, I'm actually just going to disengage from this thing, and all I care about is what the next regime is and how does it come about. You're just thinking in this completely different way. I think that I can't see any other particularly productive ways to proceed. Of course, people are going to have very, very different visions of a next regime than I have, and I think that's fine. These are it's a game that anyone can play. Anyone can write a Mirror for Princes, and probably should, if you have the talent and the vision.
Well, I'm assuming you're still sympathetic to the idea of a patchwork, so hopefully there'd be thousands of Mirrors of Princes, right?
Yes, there would be, but the thing is that the problem with patchwork is that it's the right utopia in a sense, but it also punts the question of basically what the right thing actually is, and it's thinking in a very kind of libertarians are sort of very used to doing this. They're very used to coming up with solutions where they can basically avoid specifying the answer, and saying there isn't one answer. There are thousands of answers is right in a sense. It's certainly the way the world should be organized. It's also kind of a dodge, and there's sort of, if you think about the paths to a world where this happens, I certainly there's sort of many people who believe in kind of and the Soviet Union saw this, which was a revolution of decentralization. That doesn't seem as likely to me, because I think that the local identity of the various parts of the empire, even the external empire, is just not that great anymore, and the people that believe in that identity are not that useful. I think that the set of people, it's like in the pandemic, the states governments have become more important in the US, and so they're always issuing these press releases, and in these press releases they talk about the residents of their states as if it was a nationality. So you'll be like Californians, I lived in California for 30 years and I never met anyone who identified as a Californian. Maybe for New Yorkers that's a little bit different, but still that's a dying, those are just they're just lines on a map, right? And even increasingly in Europe, among young globally minded people, they're just lines on a map. And the reestablishment of these lines for like virus purposes, is weird, but it's going to go away. And they're just lines on a map. There's no one thinks of hip 22-year-old college student thinks of there's some Spanish identity which is different from a German identity. They're all like, no, we're citizens of Europe. This is the future. So if you basically don't see these jurisdictions as having a kind of national identity the way Ukraine or Georgia or even Belarus or certainly Chechnya had, then it's kind of hard to imagine a revolution of secession. Certainly, in the 1860s, the South had a regional identity. I just, those things are so superficial. They're like, at the level of what college football team do you support, right? The not even as violent as English football supporters. And even English football supporters have toned it way down in the last 20 years, right, James? You know, the old Bill Buford book, Among the Thugs.
Next absolute monarch will be a ruthless English football club
Football.
manager.
Well, you know, it's funny. I was about to disagree with you until you said supporters, but I thought you were going to say a football supporter, which means a fan in English. But no, you mean the managers. You mean the managers. No, no, they definitely have something kingly about them. You know, someone asked me the other day who I really wanted as the American monarch, and then I said Gordon Ramsay. Just because I'm imagining, Gordon Ramsay going into the State Department and going through the State Department's fridge, basically, and being like, well, why are you sending money to these people? Like, what? You're trying to do what? This is an onion. Is this an onion? I can't even recognize it as an onion. I mean, that's I mean, the reason why you're pointing at people like this is because they're people of immense competence at the top of their game. And I mean, Gordon Ramsay's Kitchen Nightmares is a show about management and power. It's not about food, and it's kind of about food, but it's mostly about basically going into this mismanaged operation and basically saying, your framing of reality is completely wrong. Everyone hates your food. That's because it sucks. And we are basically, the first thing he has to do is basically, if you've never watched that show, it's absolutely wonderful. The British one is better than the American one. And he basically says, I'm going to show you that you're living in a fantasy world, and then we're going to fix your fantasy world, right? And so in a way, when you say to the sort of the political audiences of, the West, hey, wow, are things looking a little surreal on like your news? That's because you're living in a fantasy world. Like, I'm not going to change your, like, when you think about kind of absolute politics as opposed to absolute policy, absolute politics doesn't mean I'm going to change your mind about this issue or that issue or the other issue. It's like, I'm going to show you that you're living in a fantasy world, and then I'm going to show you the real world. And when you see the real world next to the fantasy world, you're going to be like, oh wow, that was a complete fantasy and it was totally made out of cardboard. And that's, again, I'm not going to like make some kind of like spurgy argument about, how this like tax policy is better than that tax policy. That's LARPing. I mean, policy arguments are just as much LARPing as like marching with tiki torches. Basically you're taking something that used to work in a different context and putting it in a context where it's just fake and lame.
What, just out of interest, what would be your preferred tax policy? I'm a student or influenced by Hopper, and so I'm wondering the land value tax. Are you in agreement?
Yeah. I was about to say I'm a bit of a I would do maybe a harbinger tax with a basically kind of Georgist model. I think having land rents, a harbinger tax is a self-assessed property tax. Property taxes tend to be basically less distorting than income or other taxes. Of course, tariffs are great too. The big tariff fan. The U.S. used to fund itself, almost entirely out of tariffs. If you go to the U.S. and see anything beautiful, it was probably built in a time when the U.S. was a high tariff country. I mean, the same is true of England, but to a substantial extent. Certainly Elizabeth I was no free trader. But yeah, that's. I mean, tax policy is sort of the least of the problems with the society, but or even with the economy. Of course, it's I mean, everything is like, the thing is, if you basically look at any piece of the way any of these governments is run, you're just like, this is crazy. Like, the idea of basically like reforming this into something that actually worked is an idea that could only be held by someone who was unreasonably distant from it. I mean, you have this guy in the UK, Dominic Cummings, who seems to be some kind of a nerd. And, somehow what I can't figure about Dominic Cummings is that, he seems to be intelligent, and he also has plenty of experience with the UK government. And he sometimes somehow feels that this can be turned into something useful, which is just absolutely boggles my imagination, and I refuse to believe, and is obviously wrong. Can you speak to that, James? As a
He was the man behind Brexit, so he certainly got something
Yes.
done. And he was also the man behind getting Johnson re-elected.
Yes.
And he'll get re-elected again. The whole idea of basically mirroring what Trump did and going to working class areas, the ones which have been completely alienated by the Reds, right?
But these are political. Yeah, by the Reds. I like saying Reds. Actually, I think Reds should have a comeback. People are always finding these categorical divisions. In the left, they're like, there's two kinds of leftists: communists and socialists, or there's communists, socialists, and liberals, or like the number of these spurious, banal categories which don't even really mean anything except if they're like petty factional disputes. They're just all Reds. But in any case, the small r or big R. But in any case, when you look at Cummings' victories, they've basically been essentially victories as a political engineer. But in terms of sort of, him coming in and playing, I don't know if you've seen any, I haven't seen that much of, there's this British series, The Thick of It, the first Armando Iannucci series, which is kind of a modern Yes Minister in a way. And it's just very, very good, and clearly informed by the actual reality. And the idea of like turning, that shit show into anything that actually like works or succeeds in any way without, there's this, of course, great Carlyle line from the Latter-day Pamphlets where, he says, the one reform, there is but one reform for the Foreign Office, which is to set a live coal under it. This is written in the 1840s. Nobody sets a live coal under the Foreign Office. It goes on to start World War I and basically end European civilization, or so I would assert.
Had his sort of weirdo manifesto. If you ever saw that, he was inviting anyone to apply for number 10, which is quite a strange thing going on. I mean, it's not the same as setting off coal, but it's certainly setting a hot coal. But he was
but didn't he get flamed for that? Didn't that catch fire and burn down?
They're on Cummings like a bad rash all the time. So
yeah, of course, and and that's the I mean, he smells strange. It's like this is the reaction of like a. I mean, this is honestly the reaction that sort of midwits always have to people who are genuinely bright, and Cummings is clearly genuinely bright, but like the idea of, sort of achieving policy successes with Whitehall. I mean, my God, there's let's like saying, okay, I'm going to climb Everest. I'm going to climb Everest naked. It's just like you're climbing Everest naked, man. How do you not realize that? I don't know. It's very hard for me to see. I mean, are you enthused about Boris Johnson? Are you, how do you feel about Bojo? Let's turn the tables a little here. I've talked too much.
How do I feel about it? No. I just sort of on the same, I see them both of the same spectrum like yourself. I don't, the Conservatives are almost, other than a few policies, indiscernible from Labour, really. I mean, they just take longer. It's like Nick Land says, conservatism is liberalism with its, in low gear, right? It's just going to the same place, but slower.
Right. And that's actually, even when it achieves that attempt of sort of slowing things down, it's providing a useful stabilizer for the regime, and that's yet another reason to remove the stabilizer. And because you're doing it a service by keeping it from going crazy. And what you're seeing now, especially with like these, if you get super like criminological and you look at like these newsroom revolts that are going on now, is that the woke millennials are basically purging the Gen Xers and Boomers who still have a little bit of wisdom left, and so they're just going to go a little bit crazier. They're going to go a little bit harder. You should definitely work twice as hard to stay out of their way. But it's still, I think, got to be possible to stay out of their way. And they're just sacrificing. They're just burning all of this credibility. And that's slowly going to add up. And so basically, all that Trump is doing, all that even sort of Bojo is doing, is helping them. They're just much more. What you're doing when you elect a conservative is you're basically making their fundraising appeals have so much more resonance, because basically they're never in charge. They don't want the responsibility of being in power. They want to basically see themselves as the underdogs. And, it's really quite funny, the way in which, I mean, certainly the Cold War helped the Soviet Union see itself as an underdog, from day one, right? And it was always fighting back against, imperialist capitalism, right? And so that sense of being the underdog and resisting, the invisible white conspiracy or whatever is going on now, it's like if all you have to talk about is the invisible white conspiracy, it gets a little old. But if you have, the leader of the free world who's threatening to, do God knows what and bring troops into DC and whatever, you're part of the resistance. That really sells. So that basically, all that you're doing when you fight these so-called fights is you're basically an actor in this fundraising pitch, and it's their pitch, so it doesn't really turn out well. At the same time, an enormous amount of energy is being invested in it, and a fraction of that amount of energy basically pulled away from the system, and instead providing not a sort of physical or legal exit, but an intellectual exit, is just much, much more valuable, in my own honest and very biased opinion.
Jumping back to what you were saying about people who, once you have these absolute monarchies, what is your personal teleology of a monarchy? So, is it utilitarian that it should just be a healthy state for the sake of a healthy state? Do you want the singularity? Do you want, what's the?
Oh, that's a very easy question to answer, because my answer is very traditional. It's the Latin phrase. Salus populi suprema lex. So the health of the people is the supreme law. That's actually the state motto of the state of Missouri, so it can't be racist. And I mean, it's not racist. It's not like the health of the white race is the, purpose of the state. So, when you talk about the health of the people in that sense, of course, in 2020, you see that most obviously in a very literal medical sense, right? But, there's a way of contrasting that aim, I think, very clearly against the aim of current governments, because one of the things that you see about in 20th century governments is that they use this statistic GDP, or GNP, as it used to be called before some tinkering, to try to put that statistic in terms that are accessible to a normal person. Basically, GDP is the price of all the goods sold by all of your industries. It's the price of all the goods that consumers bought, modulo trade and some other shit, right? So essentially, what you're saying is, when you compute GDP, first of all, you have this concept of value. And value is something that is, immeasurable and unknowable, but is best measured by the amount of dollars people will pay to get something, right? And so, they talk about utility. And utility is the ability to satisfy the consumer's desire for something, right? Utility means the satisfaction of desire. So essentially, when you're measuring GDP, you're measuring, and when you're optimizing for GDP, you're measuring how much satisfaction of desire did our industries, from like car makers to casinos, because casinos are satisfying desire too, heroin dealers satisfying desire. How much desire did our industries satisfy this year? Right? So you're basically, one of the interesting things, and this is a totally 20th century concept, right? This way of, these ideas of doing this kind of macroeconomics come from, the first, really the 20s and the 30s even, right? They certainly had economies under Queen Elizabeth, but the real one, but they, they had no GDP, but they cared a lot about trade, so really what you're saying here is that the purpose of an economy and the purpose of the industries of an economy is to satisfy desire. And the more you satisfy desire, the better you're doing. With me so far? Are you with me so far? Seems clear? So what's interesting here is that there's actually a connection, which most people don't recognize, between 20th century macroeconomics and Buddhism. Because they're actually saying the same thing. What they're both saying is that the purpose of life is the conquest of desire. And one of the things the Buddha said is that the only way you can conquer desire is to satisfy it. Wait, he didn't say that. Actually, it was kind of more into the opposite. And so, in a way, you have... If the motto of government that I perceive as the ideal motto of government is Salus Populi Suprema Lex, if you're basically running even just your economy on these 20th century basis, what you're saying is essentially no, it's not Salus Populi Suprema Lex, Salus meaning health, of course. It's actually Luxus Populi Suprema Lex. Popular luxury shall be the whole of the law. And, when you realize that this is basically literally the motto of the devil, Aleister Crowley, right? Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. You're basically running your whole economy on this essentially satanic principle. And then you wonder why it basically optimizes for fentanyl, porn, video games, and casinos, right? That's because, this system of economics is basically the tool of Satan. Now, this doesn't really contradict, all of the things that, Mises discovered about human action, or all of the things that Ricardo discovered about free trade. These are all these things are logically true and logically valid. It's just that they sort of don't apply to a question like, wow, is the health of the public more important than the luxury of the public? And one of the easy ways, that sort of gets you back to kind of my earlier writing about thinking about the health of the public is that when the government thinks about the health of the public, it's thinking about its population, its subjects, as capital assets, which is essentially what they are. They are capital assets. As a government, you have basically two pieces of capital. You have your people and your land. Preservation and sort of growth of capital, is, the essence of management. And if you're managing for basically preservation and growth of capital, you're like, okay, you could execute a little bit wrong, but you're basically doing the right thing. It's very hard for me to see our government is operating on anything even remotely resembling that principle. I mean, yeah, they do care about public health, sort of. I mean, a little bit. Certainly you see vast amounts of the country where just both the people and the land are just turning into these hideous scars. I mean, like West Virginia, oh my God, it's not just that the people are all on, fentanyl. It's that when they're not on fentanyl, they're basically cashing welfare checks and working in strip malls. And these are not African Americans, by the way. And well, yeah, they're like your chavs, right? They're Appalachian Americans, and I don't know if you've read the Theodore Dalrymple book, Life at the Bottom. Reads very well in the U.S. here because it completely factors race out of degeneracy. It's in fact perfectly possible to, turn white people into complete degenerates. It may be a little bit harder, but it's certainly quite achievable. You can probably even do it with Asians if you try hard enough, the Asians in our sense of the word, not yours. That's just like, that's mismanagement on a spectacular scale. And so when you're looking at these people who are like, chavs or hood rats or whatever, it's like basically, how do you turn these people into the people that they should be? Right. And, that's a completely different, how do you basically take someone who's a chav in a council house, in Britain and say, no, we're going to turn you into something Wordsworth would actually admire. Right. And that's what that person needs. It's definitely not what he wants. It's definitely not what he's asking for. Doesn't involve satisfying his desires. We know it satisfies his desires. It's more, tracksuits and hashish and, PlayStation, and porn. But there's just such a huge gap there that, you could kind of take an economy or a society, that was like Britain in the 18th century. And you could say, we're going to run this on the basis of pure satisfaction of desire and sort of pure greed. And in a way, this is what a lot of the kind of early Ruskinite, sort of socialists are reacting against. The Pre-Raphaelites, the Ruskinites, these people all come out of Carlyle, and they're just reacting to this kind of horror of modernity. You sort of disagree with like the power of capitalism to actually work and get things done. It's sort of a tremendous force, but kind of, Carlyle could already see that this night watchman state would, basically grow a lot of weeds. And it certainly grew a lot of weeds. And, if you were talking about a sort of purely libertarian kind of, like an abstract state, yeah, it has no use for these people. It can't kill them. It shouldn't kill them. And so basically the question of how you turn your tracksuited chav back into a human being is just the most important question of our time. And that's a question that's being completely ignored. Not only is it being completely ignored, it's completely incompatible with our vision of the purpose of government. And like, and that's, that's a really substantial tragedy. And so you go from, when you're thinking about those purposes, you very quickly go from, here's a sort of very large abstract difference of what does good government even mean. And then you see, because those goals are so different, you see basically just the enormous level of difference that's needed between a regime that's pursuing that kind of goal versus the present regime. And you start to see, something that I said earlier, which is, regime change is an experience that will change everyone's life. If it doesn't change everyone's life, it is not regime change. The fall of East Germany changed everyone's life in East Germany. And generally for the better, although a better job certainly could have been done in a lot of ways. But one of the principles of regime change that's the most important, I would say the most important principle, I'll just repeat this as long as I have to, is that the new regime cannot punish anyone simply for serving the old regime or supporting the old regime. And so, in a sense, sort of the more interesting question about regime change is less what it would mean for the chavs, and and more what it would mean for the cosmopolitan new laborites. As we say here in America, basically the blue state people, the people who are the governing class. And even for those people, if you don't have a vision, even for the people who work for the government, even for the people who work for the media in universities, if you can't give those people a way in which regime change makes their lives better, you're not really trying. And so, in a sense, if you're going to propose something like this, you need to basically come with you need to do all that work, and you need to basically say, yeah, this is going to change everyone's life. It has to happen. The way we live now is completely unacceptable. And whatever you're doing, it's going to change your life for the better. And even if you're some fucking flack for some anti-racism quango, okay, are you going to be a flack for an anti-racism quango, in the next regime? No, you're not, because that thing is not going to exist, and nothing like it is going to exist. Are you going to have a meaningful and fulfilling life that doesn't involve writing wooden words on paper and, bullying people? Yeah. And actually, at a certain point, you're going to be like, wow, I'm glad I'm no longer bullying people for a living. And if you can't make that kind of case, you're basically not serious. And so, the difference between thinking about problems like that and thinking about how we have better, tax policies to incentivize domestic manufacturing or some fucking shit, is orders of magnitude. And I think it's possible to think in levels that are sort of orders of magnitude more radical than the thoughts people have today, but not orders of magnitude more sort of unpleasant or disturbing or violent. And yeah, I do think that's what people want. So if you want that, subscribe to my Substack, graymirror.substack.com. I do not have a date for the next chapter, but I have a draft of the next chapter, so I'm currently revising that draft. My drafts get a lot of workings over these days, but I think we'll see it before the end of June, certainly. It might be, this one might be a little more. The problem is that I have to, because I'm writing a book, I have to start the book in ways. I have to start from the starting point. And so in a ways, the first things that I'm writing, although they're very, very important, they're the least fresh of the things that I have to say, which is a problem. And so we'll get into fresher material later, but we'll also get into paywalled material later. So as a grifter, yeah. All right.
You still doing the clear pill?
That is basically subsumed into this book. That was always basically meant to be the start of the book. I think I'll reuse that content and the content that I didn't finish posting there. But it's sort of, I found slightly better ways to say some of that. I still want to essentially, if you look at the difference between that material and what I'm doing now, I'm like, okay, let me work as hard to speak to everyone who is a tool of this regime at the same time and say one thing: stop being a fucking tool. That is the extent of the clear pill, essentially, is don't be a tool. But yeah, that material was always meant to be part of this book, actually.
Well, Curtis, thanks for coming on to Hermitix.
All right. I think so. I really appreciate our conversation. Perhaps I talked a little too much, but these things happen. And I hope your listeners enjoy it. Thanks so much for having me on.